Hello everyone. Our topic for today is muscles in the pectoral and scapular regions. Based on their locations, muscles are divided into two types. They are axioappendicular muscles and scapulo-humeral muscles. These axioappendicular muscles are connection in between the axial and appendicular skeletons. These scapulo-humeral muscles connect scapula to the humerus. Now first let us look at the axioappendicular muscles. Axioappendicular muscles are of two types. They are anterior axioappendicular muscles, posterior axioappendicular muscles. First, let us look at the anterior appendicular muscles. We have four anterior muscles. They are pectoralis major, pectoralis minor, subclavius, and serratus anterior. These four muscles are anterior axioappendicular muscles. Now let us look at them separately. First, let us discuss about the pectoralis major muscle. This is the pectoralis major muscle here. This is the fan-shaped muscle and this has two heads, that is clavicular head and sternocostal head. Let us look at these two heads in one more diagram. This is the clavicular head and this is the sternocostal head. Now let us look at the origin and insertion of the pectoralis major muscle. First, let us look at the origin. Origin of clavicular head is medial half of the clavicle. This is the medial half of the clavicle. Here, the sternoclavicular head originates. Origin of sternocostal head is superior 6 costal cartilages. These are the 6 costal cartilages. From here, the sternocostal head originates. Now let us look at the insertion. Both the clavicular head and the sternocostal head converge and inserts onto the intertubercular groove of humerus. This is the intertubercular groove of the humerus. This is the medial half of the clavicle where the clavicular head originates, and from here the sternocostal head originates, that is superior 6 costal cartilages, and these two heads converge together and inserts onto the groove of the humerus. This is the intertubercular groove of the humerus. That's all about the origin and insertion. Now let us look at their function and innervation. Now let us look at the innervation. It is innervated by the two nerves. They are lateral pectoral nerve and the medial pectoral nerve. Now let us look at the actions. If both the heads simultaneously contracts, then it performs adduction and medial rotation of humerus. If they are acting alone, then clavicular head flexes the humerus. If the sternocostal head acts alone, then it extends the humerus from the flexed position. Now let us look at them again. If both the heads contract simultaneously, it performs adduction and the medial rotation of humerus. And if they act alone, the clavicular head performs the flexion of the humerus and the sternocostal head performs extension from the flexed position. Here in this diagram, the clavicular head of the pectoralis major muscle attaches with the deltoid muscle here. And these both muscles does not blend together and they form a groove in between them. That is deltopectoral groove. This is the deltopectoral groove here. And in this deltopectoral groove, we have the cephalic vein. Inferior laterally, the pectoralis major muscle twists and forms the anterior axillary fold. This is the inferior side and this is the lateral side. Inferior laterally, it forms the anterior axillary fold. This is the anterior axillary fold here. And that's all about the pectoralis major muscle. Now let us look at the pectoralis minor muscle. This is the pectoralis minor muscle. This pectoralis minor muscle is covered by the pectoralis major muscle. Now let us look at the origin and insertion of pectoralis minor muscle. Origin of this muscle is anterior surface of third to fifth ribs. This is the third rib, this is the fourth rib, this is the fifth rib. On these three ribs, this muscle is originated. Now let us see the insertion. It inserts onto the coracoid process of the scapula. This is the coracoid process of the scapula. It originates from the 3, 4th and the 5th ribs and it inserts onto the coracoid process of the scapula. And that's all about the origin and insertion. Now let us look at the actions. It draws the scapula inferiorly and anteriorly, and it provides stability to the scapula. And during the deep inhalation, it elevates the ribs. This is how it elevates the ribs. Now let us see the innervation. It is innervated by the medial pectoral nerve. And that's all about the pectoralis minor muscle. Now let us see the subclavius muscle. This is the subclavius muscle here, and this is inferior to the clavicle and superior to the first rib. This is the clavicle and this is the first rib. It is inferior to the clavicle and superior to the first rib. And this muscle protects the subclavian vessels. Now let us look at the origin and insertion of this muscle. It originates on the first rib and its costal cartilage. This is the costal cartilage here and this is the first rib. And now let us see the insertion. It inserts onto the inferior surface of the clavicle, that is the medial third of the clavicle. This is the inferior surface of the clavicle. This is the origin of subclavius muscle and this is the insertion of subclavius muscle. Now let us see the innervation. This is innervated by the nerve to subclavius. Now let us see the action of this subclavius muscle. It stabilizes the shoulder by anchoring and depressing the clavicle. And it also stabilizes the acromioclavicular joint. This is the acromioclavicular joint. This is the acromion process and this is the clavicle. And that's all about the subclavius. Now let us look at the serratus anterior. This is the serratus anterior muscle. And this serratus anterior muscle forms the medial wall of the axilla. And it also forms the lateral wall of the thorax. It forms the medial wall of the axilla and it also forms the lateral wall of the thorax. Now let us see the origin and insertion. Origin of the serratus anterior. It originates from the lateral parts of upper 8 ribs. This is where the serratus anterior originates. And now let us see the insertion. It inserts onto the anterior aspect of medial border of the scapula and also the inferior angle of scapula. This is the anterior aspect of the scapula and here is the inferior angle of the scapula. And that's all about the origin and insertion. Now, let us see the innervation and its functions. Innervation. It is innervated by the long thoracic nerve. Now, let us see the actions. This serratus anterior protracts the scapula. Protraction means it pulls the scapula laterally and anteriorly. And this helps when we are making a punching motion. So, it is called as boxer's muscle. And it also anchors the scapula by holding it close to the thoracic wall. And it also causes the scapula to rotate upwards. Now once again let us see the actions. It protracts the scapula. That means moving the scapula anteriorly and laterally. And it also helps in the punching motion. So that is why it is called as the boxer's muscle. And it also anchors the scapula. And it also helps the scapula to rotate upwards. And that's all about the serratus anterior muscle. Now let us look at the posterior axioappendicular skeleton muscles. These posterior muscles are divided into two types. They are superficial and deep muscles. In superficial muscles, we have two muscles. They are trapezius and latissimus dorsi. We have two deep muscles. They are levator scapulae and rhomboids. First, now let us look at the superficial muscles. This is the trapezius muscle here. This muscle is large triangular muscle. This is the large triangular muscle extends from the posterior aspect of the neck to the superior aspect of the back. This is the posterior aspect of the neck and this is the superior part. This is the left muscle and this is the right muscle and this is the left. These two muscles together look like the trapezium. So it is named as the trapezius muscle. Now let us look at the origin and insertion. It originates from the medial one-third of the superior knuckle line. This is the superior knuckle line here. And from the external occipital protuberance, and from the knuckle ligament, and from the spinous processes of C7 to T12 vertebrae. And now let us see the insertion. It inserts onto the lateral 1/3 of the clavicle and also to the acromion process and the spine of the scapula. Now let us see the origin and insertion once again. It originates from medial one-third of the superior knuckle line. This is the medial one-third of the superior knuckle line here, and from the external protuberance and also from the knuckle ligament and also from the spinous processes of C7 to T12 vertebrae. And this is about the origin. Now let us see the insertion. It inserts onto the lateral one-third of the clavicle and also to the acromion process and also to the spine of the scapula. And that's all about the origin and insertion. Now let us see the innervation and function. It is innervated by spinal accessory nerve and also by the anterior rami of C3 and C4. And that's all about the innervation. This trapezius muscle is divided into the three parts. They are descending part, middle part, and the ascending part. This is the descending part, this is the middle part, and this is the ascending part. Now let us see the functions. This descending part helps in elevation of the scapula, and this middle part helps in retraction of scapula. The ascending part pulls the scapula down, and if both the ascending and descending part work together, then it rotates the scapula superiorly. The descending part helps in the elevation of the scapula, the middle part helps in retraction of the scapula, and the ascending part pulls the scapula down. If both the ascending and descending part work together, then it rotates the scapula superiorly. That's all about the function of the trapezius. Now let us look at the latissimus dorsi. This is the latissimus dorsi muscle. This latissimus dorsi acts directly on the glenohumeral joint, and this acts indirectly on the pectoral girdle. This is the large fan-shaped muscle. This extends from the trunk to the humerus. Now let us see the origin and insertion. Origin. This muscle originates from the iliac crest, thoracolumbar fascia, and from inferior 6 thoracic vertebrae, and from inferior 3 ribs. Insertion. It inserts onto the floor of intertubercular groove of humerus. Now let us see the origin and insertion in another diagram. It originates from the iliac crest, the thoracolumbar fascia, and the inferior 6 thoracic vertebrae, and from the inferior ribs. And it inserts onto the floor of intertubercular groove of the humerus. This is the point of insertion. And that's all about the insertion and origin. Now let us look at the innervation. It is innervated by the thoracodorsal nerve. Let us look at the functions. This muscle helps us to scratch the middle of our back. This muscle helps us scratching the middle of our back. It extends and medially rotates the humerus. It also adducts the humerus. It helps during rock climbing, chin-ups, and also movements like swimming. That's all about the functions. Now let us look at them again. This muscle helps to scratch the middle of our back, and it also helps to extend and medially rotates the humerus. And it also adducts the humerus. And this muscle also helps performing some activities like rock climbing, chin-ups, and swimming. And that's all about the latissimus dorsi. Let us look at the levator scapulae. We have two deep muscles. They are levator scapulae muscle and rhomboid muscles. First, now let us see the levator scapulae muscle. This is the levator scapulae muscle. This muscle lies in the neck, deep to the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Now let us see the origin and insertion. This muscle originates in the posterior tubercles of transverse processes of C1 to C4 vertebrae. Insertion. This muscle inserts onto the medial border of the scapula. From here, this muscle originates and it inserts onto the medial border of the scapula. This is the insertion here and this is the origin. And now let us see the innervation. It is innervated by dorsal scapular nerve and also the anterior rami of C3 and C4. Now let us see the functions of levator scapula. As its name says, it elevates the scapula and it also resists downward force and it also rotates glenoid cavity inferiorly. It elevates the scapula and it presses down the force and fixes the scapula in its place. And it also rotates the glenoid cavity inferiorly. And that's all about the levator scapulae. Now let us look at the rhomboids. We have two rhomboid muscles. They are rhomboid minor and the rhomboid major. This is the rhomboid minor muscle here and this is the rhomboid major muscle here. Now let us see their origin first. It originates on the knuckle ligament, spinous processes of C7 to T1 vertebrae. Now let us see the origin of rhomboid major muscle. It originates onto the spinous processes of T2 to T5. And that's all about the origin. Now let us look at the insertion. Rhomboid minor inserts onto the medial border of the scapula at the spine of the scapula. And the rhomboid major inserts onto the medial border of the scapula inferior to the spine of scapula. Now let us look at them in the diagram. This is the origin of rhomboid minor and this is the insertion here onto the scapula. This is the origin of rhomboid major muscle and this is the insertion here onto the scapula. That's all about the origin and insertion. Now let us look at the innervation and function. Innervation. These both muscles are innervated by the dorsal scapular nerve. Now let us look at the functions. It helps in scapular retraction and downward rotation of scapula, and along with the serratus anterior, it holds the scapula against the thoracic wall. And these muscles helps in the scapular retraction and also the downward rotation of the scapula, and these muscles along with the serratus anterior holds the scapula against the thoracic wall. And that's all about the rhomboid muscles. Now let us look at the scapulo-humeral muscles. These scapulo-humeral muscles passes from scapula to the humerus, and these muscles are also known as the intrinsic shoulder muscles. And we have total 6 scapulo-humeral muscles. They are, the first one is deltoid, and the second one is teres major, and the third one is supraspinatus, and the fourth one is infraspinatus, and the fifth one is teres minor, and the last one is subscapularis. These are the 6 muscles. In these 6 muscles, these 4 muscles are also known as rotator cuff muscles. Now let us see them separately. First now let us look at the deltoid muscle. This is the deltoid muscle here. This deltoid muscle forms the rounded contour of the shoulder. Now let us see the origin. It is originated from the spine of the scapula, the acromion process, and the lateral one-third of the clavicle. An insertion. It inserts onto the deltoid tuberosity of the humerus. It originates from the spine of the scapula, the acromion process, and also from the lateral one-third of the clavicle. And it inserts onto the deltoid tuberosity of the humerus. Now let us see the innervation. This is innervated by the axillary nerve. This deltoid divides into the 3 parts. They are clavicular part, the acromial part, and the spinal part. This is the clavicular part, and this is the acromion part, and this is the spinal part. Now let us see the functions of the deltoid. It helps in the abduction of the arm. It abducts the hand after the 15 degrees. The initial 15 degrees is abducted by the supraspinatus muscle. The clavicular part helps in the flexion and also the medial rotation. The acromial part helps in abduction. The spinal part helps in extension, and also the lateral rotation. And that's all about the functions of deltoid muscle. Now let us look at the teres major muscle. This is the teres major muscle here. Now let us see the origin and insertion. Origin. It originates from the posterior surface of inferior angle of the scapula. Insertion. It inserts onto the medial lip of intertubercular groove of humerus. This is the origin. This is the posterior surface of the scapula. And this is the inferior angle here. It originates from the posterior surface of the inferior angle of the scapula. And this is the insertion here. It inserts onto the medial lip of the intertubercular groove of the humerus. And that's all about the origin and insertion. Now let us look at the innervation. It is innervated by lower scapular nerve. Now let us look at the functions. It adducts and medially rotates. It performs adduction and also the medial rotation. And that's all about the teres major muscle. Now let us look at the rotator cuff muscles. As we already discussed, we have 4 rotator cuff muscles. Now let us see them in the diagram. This is the supraspinator muscle. This is the infraspinatus muscle. This is the subscapularis muscle. And this is the teres minor muscle. Supraspinatus muscle is above the spine of the scapula, and the inferior spinatus muscle is below the spine of the scapula, and the subscapularis is in the fossa of the scapula. Now let us look at them separately. Now let us see the supraspinatus muscle. This is the supraspinatus muscle here, which is above the spine of the scapula. This is located posteriorly to the scapula. This supraspinatus stabilizes the head of the humerus in the glenoid cavity. Now let us see the origin. It originates from the supraspinous fossa. Insertion. It inserts onto the superior facet of the greater tubercle of humerus. This is originated from the supraspinous fossa of the scapula, and it inserts onto the superior facet of greater tubercle of the humerus. And that's all about the origin and insertion. Now let us look at the function and innervation. Innervation. It is innervated by the suprascapular nerve. Function. It helps in abduction. Though it is a rotator cuff muscle, it performs abduction instead of rotation. And that's all about the supraspinatus muscle. Now let us look at the infraspinatus muscle. This is the infraspinatus muscle here. First, let us see the origin. It originates from the infraspinous fossa of the scapula. Insertion. It inserts onto the middle facet of greater tubercle of the humerus. Innervation. It is innervated by suprascapular nerve. Now let us see the function. It laterally rotates the arm. And that's all about the infraspinatus muscle. Now let us look at the teres minor muscle. This is the teres minor muscle here. Now let us see the origin. It originates from the middle part of the lateral border of the scapula. It inserts onto the inferior facet of greater tubercle of the humerus. Innervation. It is innervated by axillary nerve. This is the origin here, and this is the insertion. Now let us see the function. It rotates the arm medially. That's all about the teres minor muscle. Now let us look at the subscapularis muscle. This is the subscapularis muscle. Origin. This originates from the subscapular fossa. Insertion. It inserts onto the lesser tubercle of the humerus. Innervation. Upper and lower subscapular nerves. And the action. It helps in medial rotation. And that's all about the subscapularis muscle. And that's all about the muscles in the pectoral and scapular regions. Now let us look at them very briefly based on their functions. Now let us see the muscles which elevates the scapula. They are levator scapulae muscles, the trapezius, that is the descending part, the rhomboid major, and the rhomboid minor. These 4 muscles elevates the scapula. Now let us look at the muscles which depresses the scapula. There are 2 muscles. They are trapezius, ascending portion, and the serratus anterior muscle. These two muscles depresses the scapula. Now let us see the muscles which helps in the lateral rotation and also the medial rotation. They are trapezius, descending part, and also the serratus anterior. And for the medial rotation, we have levator scapulae, rhomboid major, and the rhomboid minor. And that's all about the muscles. And that's all about the video. If you like the content, please do like, share, subscribe to my channel. And if you have any queries and if you have any suggestions for this channel, please do comment down below in the comment section. And thank you.